part of ITV1, this is Carlton. Looking at tomorrow night, we've The Bill at 8 o'clock, followed by Ultimate Force, SAS action drama starring Ross Kemp at 9 tomorrow night.
Ian Huntley fit to stand trial over Holly and Jessica. Trimble gives Blair 1 week to save the peace process. Fury at the secrets hidden behind our petrol signs. And how Nancy left Beckham & Co. in the shade.
The ITV News at 10 with Trevor MacDonald.
Good evening. The school caretaker charged with murdering Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman will stand trial after all, probably next summer. Psychiatrists monitoring Ian Huntley for the last month say he's not mentally ill. As the judge made his ruling today, Huntley shook and turned pale. Tonight he's had to swap his psychiatric hospital for a high-security prison in Buckinghamshire. From there, Geraint Vincent reports.
Ian Huntley is spending his first night at Woodhill Prison. He'll be kept here until he's next called to appear before a judge. After undergoing psychiatric tests at a secure hospital in Nottinghamshire for much of the last month, the 28-year-old former caretaker made his second appearance at Crown Court in Peterborough this morning. Prosecution barrister Kareem Khalil came to the hearing with the results of those tests. He told the judge that Mr. Huntley was found not to be suffering from any mental illness and that his mental state was entirely normal. Flanked by a security guard and a psychiatric nurse, the defendant was dressed smartly in a shirt and tie. He trembled throughout the hearing, and as the judge ordered that he go to prison until his next appearance, he stood and stumbled before leaving the dock. Ian Huntley can expect a very different kind of life at Woodhill Prison after Rampton. There, the 400 inmates are treated as patients. At Woodhill, the 700 inhabitants are very definitely prisoners, even if on remand. In Rampton, Mr. Huntley had supervised access to a gym and a swimming pool. Now he'll have an exercise yard. Rampton patients include Beverly Allett, the paediatric nurse who killed 4 children. Woodhill houses Charles Bronson, dubbed Britain's most dangerous man.
He'll be locked up most of the time. He'll be subject to full cell searches, certainly weekly, maybe moved from cell to cell every couple of weeks. His visitors will have to have their photograph taken, his stuff in terms of his clothing may be removed from his cell at night in order to prevent an escape. But largely throughout the day he'll spend his time locked up.
Police are continuing their investigations at the house which Ian Huntley shared with his girlfriend Maxine Carr. She's accused of conspiracy to pervert the course of justice. Today's decision marks the start of the official countdown to the trials of Ian Huntley and Maxine Carr. Mr. Huntley is now remanded in custody here at Woodhill Prison until November the 15th, when a hearing at Norwich Crown Court will decide the timetable of events. The prosecution then has until November the 29th to present its case against both defendants. Their trials could begin sometime in the middle of next year. Tonight, Mr. Huntley will have had a full assessment gauging the risk of suicide. He'll spend his time here in segregation. Geraint Vincent, ITV News, Milton Keynes.
The countdown began today to the collapse of the power-sharing government of Northern Ireland. The Ulster Unionist leader and First Minister David Trimble has given Tony Blair an ultimatum. Throw Sinn Féin out of the executive or we walk out in a week. Here's our senior political correspondent Joe Andrews.
David Trimble arriving at the Tory party conference in Bournemouth after giving the Prime Minister an ultimatum. Expel Sinn Féin from Northern Ireland's government by Monday or the Unionists will walk out.
I think it is no longer feasible to sustain the administration on the present basis because of the failure of the Republicans to show that they're committed to exclusively peaceful and democratic means.
This crisis began after a raid on Sinn Féin's Stormont offices. Police say they turned up evidence that Sinn Féin have been collecting information, possibly for the IRA. Ministers are said to be very angry about a database of police and prison officers' home addresses and transcripts of conversations between Mr. Blair and President Bush. But Sinn Féin hotly denies spying.
Last Friday's events were a bit of political theatre, conducted by people who are opposed to the Good Friday Agreement and who are opposed to the peace process.
So what are Downing Street's options now? Mr Blair could put a motion before the Assembly to expel Sinn Féin from Northern Ireland's government. If the Assembly agreed to eject Sinn Féin, the rest of the power-sharing government could carry on without them. If not, the Ulster Unionists would quit the government, which would lead to the collapse of Stormont's institutions and perhaps a return to direct rule of the province from London. But Mr Blair is much more likely to favour suspending the Assembly in the hope that further negotiations could stabilise things. On the streets of Belfast, many remain optimistic despite the present problems.
People are trying to do their best, they're trying to build on what we've done, and it might not be a perfect situation, but it's better than violence and it's better than nothing, you know.
If we all sort of hope that there is a future, then I think we can achieve it.
If the Assembly is suspended, it won't be the first time, but instead the fourth time in 4 years. But underlying this crisis is the much more serious problem that the majority of the unionist community now seems to have lost faith in the Good Friday Agreement. Jo Andrews, ITV News, Westminster.
President Bush has told Americans again that if Saddam Hussein doesn't disarm his weapons of mass destruction, the US military will do it for him. In his starkest speech yet, he spelt out the threats from Saddam himself, his terrorist allies, and from nuclear weapons.
Iraq's weapons of mass destruction are controlled by a murderous tyrant who has already used chemical weapons to kill thousands of people. This same tyrant has tried to dominate the Middle East, has invaded and brutally occupied a small neighbor, has struck other nations without warning, and holds an unrelenting hostility toward the United States. Iraq could decide on any given day to provide a biological or chemical weapon to a terrorist group or individual terrorists. Alliance with terrorists could allow the Iraqi regime to attack America without leaving any fingerprints. Facing clear evidence of peril, we cannot wait for the final proof, the smoking gun that could come in the form of a mushroom cloud.
That message was clearly understood by thousands of miles away by the men and women aboard the American aircraft carrier Abraham Lincoln. They're preparing to head for the Gulf. The ship is now in the Arabian Sea, and on board is our defense correspondent, Kevin Dunn.
As dawn broke over the Arabian Sea, the carrier Abraham Lincoln was being replenished. Helicopters winching aboard supplies of bombs and ammunition, food and fuel, for a conflict many on board believe is coming. Which is why, below deck, President Bush's speech was being followed intently by sailors too young to have yet experienced war.
Nobody wants to go to war, but if that's what it takes for us to be able to ensure that our families and everyone back home is safe, then that's what we're out here to do.
But what was the view from the bridge?
Clearly it depends on the mission and the level of the threat, but even with a very significant threat, I think an aircraft carrier can bring a lot of striking power to that threat.
In the 4 years since Baghdad was last attacked, the United States has itself improved its weapons, conventional ones of course, and now has more precision, laser-guided and satellite-guided bombs.
The carrier's formidable firepower has also been enhanced by the new Super Hornet, deployed here for the first time. Pilots say it gives them extra power and extra punch.